This is a small utility knife from Wiltshire. Very old company, very well recognized. I picked it up because the edge has a titanium nitride coating on one side. The other side, of course, just a regular steel. Now, aside from the titanium nitride coating, it's just a very basic stainless steel, sort of large paring knife, small utility knife. Bit of background and history on titanium nitride coating on knives. Buck introduced one quite some time ago as part of the IonFusion line. And what they found when they performed CATRA testing on it, or had CATRA testing done rather, was that the edge retention was simply phenomenal. A normal CATRA testing cycle is to basically take the knife in a rig and press it down through a stack of silica impregnated paper 60 times. 1 cut, 2 cut, 3 cut. And after the 60 cuts you add up the amount of actual slices of paper that it goes through. And after 60 cycles, again you're cutting through paper that's impregnated with an abrasive. Most knives are very dull. And in fact, Spyderco even uses 2 cycles on their serrated knives. Well, what Buck found with the IonFusion line was that they could keep cycling it, cycle after cycle after cycle, and the knives kept cutting. So the edge retention was completely phenomenal. However, when they talked to users, the feedback they got was completely different. It held up a bit longer than the steel knives, but nowhere near what the CATRA tests said. So they had a bit of a problem. So the next thing Buck did was, well, they took some guys and just had them cut with the knives. Cut some cardboard rope, and then they do 1 cut with the CATRA machine to check the sharpness, how far down into the paper did it go, and then just have regular people again sit down and do some more cutting. So what Buck found was basically comparable to what they were getting with the user feedback reports, that the edge retention was improved over the regular stainless steel knives that they were using, but nowhere near what the machine-based CATRA testing was showing. And of course what was actually happening is a well-known phenomena in metallurgy when you have 2 dissimilar metals quite next to one another on some kind of edge. So on this side you have the titanium nitride coating, and this side you have basic steel. Both of them essentially meet around where the apex is. So of course this is what your edge looks like, and you have one part which is titanium nitride, and you have one part which is steel, and they sort of come together. Now the steel part wears back a bit faster than the titanium nitride, so you end up with this. So you can see your apex here very clearly as your titanium nitride and your steel. They form the apex. As your steel wears away faster, it exposes a little lip of titanium nitride. Now the titanium nitride also wears, but it wears much slower than the steel. So you always have this little lip of titanium nitride sticking out. And that's what essentially formed that cutting edge that was staying in the CATRA machine. So it didn't matter how many cycles you ran it, the steel would always be behind the titanium nitride. It would wear faster. So the knife essentially would never go dull past the point of thickness of the titanium nitride coating. So the obvious question is, why is there a difference when people use it when compared to the machine? Well, of course, the machine has the knife fixed in a very stable jig. It just cuts up, down, up, down, up, down like this. There's no really lateral side-to-side twisting or prying motions. Well, a normal person can't cut like that. You're not a robot. So even when you make what you think is a controlled slice, if you look at it very, very carefully, there's lots of side twisting and rolling action going on. So again, if you get into that situation where you start off nice and even, steel and titanium nitride, and the steel wears away a bit like this and exposes that little lip up here, well, that little lip just snaps right off immediately, and it goes back to being like this. So of course the question is, well, why doesn't that happen when people use it? Of course it does happen when people use it. Again, titanium nitride and steel. Steel wears back a bit faster, exposes that little lip of titanium nitride, but when you're cutting with a knife and you're a person holding onto it, the edge is twisting, it's moving, it's around all kinds of different forces and shapes, and they crack that little lip right off, boom. But in a machine which holds it in a rigorous movement, up, down, up, down, up, down, the edge is stable, and that little lip of titanium nitride will cut essentially forever. And even when it wears down, the steel has already wore down past it and exposes it fresh again. So it will never go dull. You can just cycle it over and over and over again. But again, that's a case of where you have an extremely precise measurement from the CATRA machine which has no accuracy whatsoever because it's not replicating the actual thing that you're trying to measure, which is how would it hold up when a person is using it. So you always need to be careful. It's not just simply about making a very precise measurement, it's about making a very accurate measurement. Am I measuring the thing that I really need to be measuring? So this knife, I found again, this is part of the inexpensive or cheap sort of series of knives, was on sale for like $2. Great. So now I have a titanium nitride coated edge. And the really funny thing is if you look at the packaging, it says, super sharp edge, lasts 5 times as much as steel, hand honed, all this great stuff. But when I got it, it was extremely blunt. And when you looked at the edge was actually reflecting light. And it looked like to me that what had happened was that they had basically a very, very nice well-formed steel edge like this, and then they coated it, and the coating actually went up on top of the edge like that and rounded it off, because the edge was clearly reflecting light and was quite dull when I got it. Slice a tomato, I mean, you're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth before you finally break the skin. Had no ability to shave. You could slice newsprint a little bit, but you were jagging, you were tearing it, and you had to be quite careful. However, the really nice thing about titanium nitride is that while it is very hard, in fact it's harder than a lot of the carbides found in steels, it's just a bit softer than aluminum oxide. And the reason that that's critical is because aluminum oxide is the abrasive that most stones are made out of. And the great thing is you're only sharpening this side, which is a very simple stainless steel. Inox wrote on it, which usually refers to a particular type of steel, 5CR13, and this is probably what this is. So you're sharpening this side, which is extremely trivial, again, low carbide, relatively soft stainless steel, and then the edge gets formed of the intersection of that and the titanium nitride. And there's no burr formed, because this is again a rigid strip of metal, and you're not pressing very hard. If you press hard, you'll actually fold the edge over, and you can probably crack this strip off, so you don't want to do that. But very trivial to sharpen. And the other ironic thing about this, or the thing that I found a bit funny, it only has a single bevel edge, which is approximately the exact same angle that you would find on Mora knives and stuff like that. So I found it quite funny, but it has a single bevel edge, the same as you would find on a lot of bushcrafting knives. And now I have a relatively interesting little tool, because I have a way to look at the edge retention of solid titanium nitride. Practically, even without using it, I don't think it's going to be of significant advantage for most people using kitchen knives. Because what I've seen again and again when I just sharpen knives for friends and family, the knives normally don't come back to be sharpened when they've wore down smoothly. They've come back when they've simply been damaged from being put in sinks, from being put in drawers with other knives, from being used to scrape. And in that kind of use, this is actually going to be worse. Because you can imagine, if this edge takes a ding or takes a hit, it's going to fold the edge around. Well, if as soon as you sharpen it on this side, you remove the titanium nitride, boom, that's gone. And you're back to a normal knife again. So you can only sharpen it on this side. But what happens if the edge gets pushed over to that side? It's got a ding which is pushed over here that you really can't fix without throwing away the titanium nitride. So if you're very careful, it could be quite interesting. But for most people, I don't think it practically will be an advantage. But again, this is $2. It's kind of a curious little knife. So I'm kind of interested to see, number one, how this is going to work in the kitchen. But before I do that, I'm going to do some stock tests on cardboard, because I think it will get damaged in regular kitchen use. And so I'll use it on some cardboard before that. And the two things I'm interested in is, number one, what's the raw edge retention like? But number two, can the edge be formed on the titanium nitride with a relatively low grit finish? It takes a high polish relatively easy. It's at an 8,000 grit finish now, no issues with it. But go down to say a 600 grit finish, which in general does perform better in some kitchen work when you're doing draw or slicing cuts. So that's the two things I'm going to be interested in. How does it perform at low grit finishes? How does it perform at high grit finishes? I'm not even 100% sure if it will get sharp at a very coarse finish, because the titanium nitride might actually just break up. Only drawbacks of it, in terms of fit and finish, but again, keeping in mind that this is of course a $2 knife, this section of the edge down here wasn't brought all the way back fully on the blade, so this section is blunt, but they coated it with titanium nitride, which is a bit funny, but it's simply blunt. I bring this all the way down. I don't see the sense in having that there, although some people like it for a bit of a pseudo guard or protection from your fingers. This front portion right here, this little squarish part, that's again relatively uncomfortable. I'd round that off. The slabs, when they're actually formed together, they didn't buff off the actual join line, so you can feel that that's a bit rough. The same as the rivets are not flush to the scales, and the point is not actually formed. It doesn't actually get brought to a point. The grind is a bit rough. But again, $2 knife, this will be a bit interesting. And the alternate to that, which is becoming relatively popular now, and here's an example of it. This is a Shakira from Warren Thomas, titanium blade, and that basically has tungsten carbide on the back. And that's becoming a bit popular now. Tungsten carbide, again, much harder than steel, and much harder than titanium, obviously. The issue with that, though, is that while titanium nitride is a uniform coating, the tungsten carbide is not uniform. It varies quite in consistency. And the argument from many of the people who have been using it, they comment on the roughness of the edge and the fact that you can't get it extremely sharp. And the limiting effect of sharpness appears to be the thickness of the actual coating. And this coating is much thicker than a titanium nitride coating. And the structure of it, again, is much coarser. Haven't done a lot of work with this yet. This is catching on because it's relatively inexpensive for knife makers to actually buy and do themselves and put it on blades, but it has some limitations. So it'll be interesting to work with this eventually. And this I just picked up recently from Bruce Rugg of Wise Old Knives. This is his Ergo Slice Bushcraft. I normally don't get a lot into aesthetics of knives, but my perspective was changed many years ago when I was talking to Chaz Clements, very well-known case maker, and his perspective was always that yes, make it functional first, but there's no reason why when it's functional that it can't be pretty, as he says. This is an absolutely stunning knife to look at. The handle is burl, very high polish. There's a lot of interesting features about this knife, many of which I'll go in more detail later on. The handle is one of the strong points, and I normally don't give a lot of consideration to handles beyond some basics. But this one I know has changed my perspectives on grips in a number of ways because of the level of functionality that you have in the grip. And it's also very smooth to the touch, but it's extremely secure and it's extremely comfortable in hand due to the shape and the way that it indexes. And you can see it is handle heavy. It'll rotate back, which makes it extremely stable in hand. The balance, of course, is just behind my index finger, so it sits relatively comfortably, and you can see in the index finger cutout or choil area in the handle. So like I said, very striking visually. He's Ergo Slice Bushcraft model, and I think it's going to be an absolute pleasure to use. So I'll look forward to using this and talking about it a bit in the future as well. And there's his stamp, Bruce Rugg, Wise Old Knives, and on the other side is Collie Harris of CKC Knives, because this is a bit of a collaboration between the two makers.